Welcome once again to Breakfast Central. Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Wednesday indefinitely suspended the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC), AbdulRasheed Bawa, from office. He said this is to allow for a thorough investigation into his conduct while in office, following weighty allegations of abuse of office against him.
Consequently, Mr. Bawa was directed to immediately hand over the affairs of his office to the Director of Operations of the Commission, who will oversee the affairs of the Office of the Chairman of the Commission, pending the conclusion of the investigation. We also have reports that the Department of State Services, DSS, has invited the suspended chairman of the EFCC, Mr. AbdulRasheed Bawa. Now, this morning, we also have reports that according to the DSS Public Relations Officer, Peter Afunanya, the invitation relates to some investigative activities concerning him. To discuss more about the story, joining us this morning is the Director General of the Heritage Center, Abuja, Kaj Ononuju. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. It's quite a scenario we have here on our hands. This is not the first time we're seeing a suspension of the EFCC chairman, and for reasons being given that there is an investigation that needs to have happened. The last suspension we saw was in President Muhammadu Buhari's time, and it doesn't seem like we have seen an end to what the result of that investigation was. So what do you make of this current suspension, and what's the way forward from here?
Well, it's a very pertinent question. The suspension was inevitable because for President Bola Tinubu to actually move forward in interrogating events in the last government, you cannot have Mr. Bawa, who was installed being a nephew of Mr. Malami. Mr. Malami was a persona dramatis in regards to the songs now being sung by the arrested central bank governor. And so it will not be in order to expect that Mr. Bawa, who is Mr. Malami's nephew, will be able to interrogate persons around his uncle. I don't think that is possible.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Ononuju.
Seems like we're having technical difficulties. We're hoping that we're able to reconnect with Mr. Ononuju. So one of the conversations is talking of course about the fact that he doesn't see how he'll be able to conduct a thorough investigation into this situation, especially because it's his nephew. Another thing I'd have loved for him to answer would be the fact that putting that aside, like, are we ever going to see an end to this investigation? All right, Mr. Ononuju, yes, thank you for joining us. You were speaking about you not seeing the possibility of him being able to conduct a thorough investigation because of his nephew being the subject matter.
All right. It's the nephew of the Abubakar Malami. That's what he's talking about. But of course, it depends on who is investigating who now. Is the current administration trying to investigate the EFCC chairman? Is it investigating every ministry, department, and agency, from the past administration? Are they trying to clean up the house, or are they really just trying to replace certain persons with people who, would fit better for the current administration? Because that's really what it has, some people might argue, is going on. Mr. Ononuju, can you hear us now? Yeah, you might have, shaky network this morning, but that's really where the argument goes a lot of times. Is this being done with sincerity of purpose? Is it because they feel like there's genuinely weighty allegations against AbdulRasheed Bawa that need to be investigated? Or is this just really the way that it always plays out, where every time a new government comes into office, they replace heads of certain departments and agencies with people who would, work
Be loyal
mostly in
to
their
them.
favor,
Yes.
exactly, and take out the ones who were there, in the past.
There was a video, I don't know if you saw that
Malam-
video of, sorry to interject, a video of where they were talking about the lavish lifestyle he lived. And,
Yeah, those are,
Yeah.
So here's the thing, let's go back to Mr. Ononuju. Mr. Ononuju, can you hear us now? Yeah, we're still struggling with it. So those things always happen. And that's why, I would speak as the average Nigerian. It's not news that you hear these sensational stories of how this person was living a lavish lifestyle, exactly, and spent billions of naira or mismanaged billions of naira. But here's the thing that the average Nigerian also doesn't see. We don't see these people go to jail. And so regardless of how many of these sensational news headlines that you see about how this person, had dollars, stashed in their houses, or how they were living a life, how had bought houses here, bought, houses in Dubai and all of that, what we never see is that there's a thorough investigation carried out and these people go to jail. He's not the first one to be invited. And one of the things I was going to ask Mr. Ononuju is if this is really just playing to the gallery. Same thing happens every single time. Ibrahim Magu, if you remember, the former EFCC chairman, was also, suspended, eventually
we
replaced.
haven't heard anything
Thank
about
you.
it.
He was also invited by the DSS, if you remember. And right after his invitation by the DSS, that's the end of the story. Catch Ononuju, can you hear us? We apologize for the network challenges that we're currently facing. Okay, brilliant. So I was just asking.
As I was saying,
yeah,
it's simply a consequence of Mr. Emefele's songs. As Emefele has been arrested and he's singing, a lot of the things that were done centered around the activities and authorizations legally from Mr. Malami. You don't expect the president to act on those issues, and you want the nephew of Mr. Malami to now be delegated to interrogate and prosecute cases of persons around his uncle. I think that was just natural, that Bawa had to be sent away with one excuse or the other. Don't forget Bawa himself. A lot has come around him. There were complaints about him. There were issues about him spending money in millions of dollars as he traveled to the Hajj. So you can find a lot of things to ask him to stay away. There were complaints about the areas he didn't qualify, and Mr. Malami just brought him in. Malami was de facto the president's man Friday, and so a lot of questions that would come from Mr. Emefele's depositions.
Yeah, but Mr. Ononuju, this is the problem that I believe that everyone would have with that narrative. If you remember, over time, the narrative really has been that every government has its scapegoat. But what we never see is proper prosecution of these personalities, of these persons, regardless of what you're accusing them of. Godwin Emefiele now, and it almost feels like, at this point, it feels like a TV series where a person is suspended, the next day you hear that the DSS has invited him, and that's where the story ends. 2 days later, another person is suspended, DSS invites him, that's where it ends. Nobody goes to court, nobody does proper, investigation. There's also the parts where there's no way that Godwin Emefiele, whatever he's been accused of, acted alone. He acted with other people. He was, of course, with the previous administration. There are other people in that previous administration that should also be called into question, not just Godwin Emefiele. Nobody knows what he's been charged with or what he has been suspended for. Same thing with AbdulRasheed Bawa. So, Mr. Ononuju, do you think that this is really just the Nigerian TV series where a person is suspended, goes to the DSS, a couple of weeks later, that's the end of the story? We never hear of any court case. We never hear that they're jailed. We never hear that they're prosecuted. It just ends there. The Accountant General of Federation, remember, was accused of stealing or of mismanaging more than 100 billion naira. Till date, that story is dead.
You are very correct. And that's why nobody should take whatever President Tinubu is doing seriously. It could be grandstanding as a way to situate young people who were primarily the owners of the movement that supported Mr. Peter Obi. A lot of people in discussions tell me Tinubu may be preparing for a rerun. So trying to placate the young with student loan things like this grandstanding. I don't take any of what he's doing now seriously. Why do I say that? He is of the ACN stock. In the APC, the CPC was in ascendancy. So it's expected that the members of the ACN, caucus could simply be rounding up members of the CPC who were in ascendancy under President Buhari's government. So I do not take any of what Tinubu is doing now seriously. Because as you rightly pointed out, he may just grandstand and then tomorrow nothing comes out of it. Why do I say this? The case is still at the tribunal. And if you remember the circumstances of how he was brought in to power, you will understand that should he do anything very drastic against members of the CPC faction, they could just go to the tribunal and bewitch him the way Mr. Anini bewitched Governor Usumbo. You remember?
Yes.
They belong to the same party, but because Governor Usumbo started moving out to bring in a lot of legacy families in Edo State into his fold, Mr. Anini got angry and went to the tribunal, spilled the beans, and Mr. Usumbo lost at the tribunal. So for that same reason, I believe Tinubu may just be grandstanding. I don't think we should take him seriously yet, because should he move hard against the CPC faction caucus, we know they can go to the court and start saying, this is what we did, this is what we did. The man really didn't win. So I have this in my thoughts.
Right.
I am not taking anything yet fully. I'm just taking them with, as they said, a pinch of salt.
Okay.
Nothing should be taken seriously until we see actual prosecutions.
Right.
The
Speaking of prosecutions, speaking of prosecutions, there have been people who have called for the arrest and prosecution of Malami because, it is said that he, like you've mentioned, apart from the relationship that they both have, he was aware of it. I mean, they allege that he was aware of a number of things that Bawa might have been accused of, seeing that he nominated him, supervised him, and at the end of the day, he should also be brought to book. Do you think that that is something that might happen now or in the nearest future?
Well, these are questions you're asking. I do not think that President Tinubu currently has the autonomy of space to do that. I don't think so. He might do it later on. He may also be doing all this, as you have heard him tell most people who've gone to him, that I paid you off. I don't owe you anything. Of course, you saw the tweet yesterday by Malami El-Rufai saying that if the axe forgets the contributions of the forest to its making, that the trees in the forest do not forget very easily. So that's a very ominous statement, and I take that. So we're looking at all this. Don't forget, currently, INEC wrote their result to proclaim Tinubu based on reports they took from local governments and states. What is currently being brought to the tribunals are results from the boots and words, which INEC doesn't have. So anything can happen. That's why you must not take anything very seriously. These things may be grandstanding, because if truly Tinubu wants to interrogate the excesses of the past administration, Mr. Malami, being the man Friday who worked for President Buhari after the passing of Mr. Bakari, must be interrogated for everything. There is no way Mr. Hadi Sidika will have gotten money to pay Ethiopia Airlines for display of painted aircraft if Malami didn't sign on to it. So Malami's name is legally on a lot of the transactions that Buhari will tell you he put his signature to. That's why he said, if there is crisis, don't come back to me telling me President Buhari told. No, carry your cross yourself. So I don't take anything that Tinubu is doing now seriously, unless, as you rightly pointed out, it is sustained onto a prosecution. We know how these things work. You know, when you start seizing the money, because the monies haven't traveled too far. If you really want to know what happened, follow the money. That's why they followed Emefiele. And as Emefiele sings about the distribution of money, you'll be able to bring in each and every culprit and then prosecute the cases that you want to prosecute by bringing in those you think you can now use to change Mr. Bawa. So I'm not surprised in changing Bawa. That is the right thing to do. You can't expect Mr. Bawa to lead the charge in prosecuting things around his uncle, and you cannot expect anybody to do anything about the past administration without putting Mr. Malami right in the middle, since he played
the summary. So the summary basically would be that Nigerians should not hold their breath. You know, this really could just be political games being played here or there. And of course, you know, the setup of the new government. But I also want to talk about, you know, now we're setting up the new government, the special advisors, you know, that the president has, of course, just named. Nuhu Ribadu, of course, who is also a former EFCC chairman, the very first EFCC chairman, remember. Dele Alake, of course, has also been named. Wale Adun has also been named, of course, and a few other people have been, of course, you can see that on your screen. They are some of the people that will be handling positions in the current administration. What they're doing is a former Lagos commissioner and a special advisor on monetary policies. Of course, Nuru Ribadu, of course, is the first EFCC chairman, is going to be a special advisor on security. The appointments, about 8 of them and a few other people that are just missing their names now. But I want your thoughts on some of these persons and the narrative that Bola Ahmed Tinubu is known to always put the right persons in positions to, you know, help his government. He puts square pegs in square holes, as he has been, you know, said to do during the campaign season. So let's talk about some of these persons, and also, you know, the people that have also been rumored to maybe be nominated for ministerial positions, which include former governors, Abdullahi Ganduje, Kayode Fayemi, and a few others. Share your thoughts on these nominations.
I will simply tell you that these nominations are not new. If you remember Wale was among those who worked with Tinubu in Lagos. He was amongst the 3 people Tinubu put forward to Buhari for several appointments, but it never materialized. You remember, most of them have been with Tinubu for more than a decade today. If you look at that of my Jukun friend, Ribadu was Tinubu's previous presidential candidate in ACN, so there's nothing new there. These are all people who have been with Tinubu for a long time. There are no new appointments, simply a polite progression of his inner think tank to the national space as special advisors. There's no surprise there, there's nothing new here. So talk about peg or no peg, no. These are Tinubu's men. He simply has allowed them to continue to be his kitchen cabinets, pending when he appoints people. And this also tells you the character of the Tinubu appointment. So this will tell you there's nothing new. There's nothing new. These things are okay, they're expected. Let us see. As you're talking about, I am only excited about policies like that of removal of subsidy, and which I think is good, but it's the way it's done with our palliatives. I remember Mr. Tinubu went to complain when Goodluck removed subsidy, but I thought he would have followed Goodluck's way of presenting palliatives instead of just saying subsidy is not there protected in the budget, which I inherited. And then I said, this is nothing new yet. The men so nominated and appointed are not new. We know them before to be with him. There is no surprise in saying.
I'd like to find out your thoughts as quickly as possible on the fact that, you know, many people have, or there are people who say that these are just frivolities that the government is spending unnecessary money on, that we, as much as possible, need to cut the cost of governance, as we're saying that citizens have to feel the pinch, the short-term pinch that will yield the long-term result with all the policies and the shaking up that's happening with the Tinubu administration, that we do not necessarily need as many special advisors as are being appointed, and that these are areas in which the government should look to cutting costs. Do you share same sentiments?
I don't look at such little frivolities. The most fundamental move he has made in terms of bringing down the cost of governance is the removal of government-sustained activity in the energy markets, which is the subsidy end. Look at that. Instantly, 80% of the money being stolen by individuals have gone. So that's why I'm looking also, if you're asking that, what happens to Mele Kyari? Mele Kyari supervised a lot of the subsidy fraud. Mele Kyari was the sole importer of petroleum. I want Tinubu, if he's serious, interrogate the Dangote refinery, because Dangote as a model may not be serving the country's interests. He has now become a conduit for fraudulent thieves who want to steal and hide Nigerian money. And we now can see that the refinery itself, it's actually been built by people in government with Nigerian money, but pretentiously, they will now go say they are his partners. That's where I think the president should put his eyes on. Dangote, as a business model, is a fraud. And I think he should now look to that refinery, since we know it's our money. Emefiele has confessed already that money is from government, has already made Dangote pay off 70% of the cost of the refinery. And don't forget, it was the cost that actually nearly brought it to an end. And the minute government moved in, brought in things, 70% is paid. Let us find out how that 70% came about without the refinery commencing anything. Of course, you know the refinery is not yet completed. It's not yet done its test run. That's where, if you want me to ask,
just as just as you've said, Mr. Onoju, yeah, yes. we unfortunately have to interject at this moment because we've run out of time for the interview. But just as you said, we are going to have to wait to see what this administration is really about. If it's really out to make a change, or if this is just grandstanding, like you say. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning.
Having me.